What is up, guys? So, we spent the last, 6 classes together talking about political revolutions. And the political revolutions will cause lots of change. It's going to change the way that people view their relationship with government. It's going to change the way that people view the rights that all people have. They're going to question authority, and they're going to question why things are the way they are. That seems like a really big deal. And yet, it's not. None of those are the most important revolution that takes place. In this unit, you're going to see the start of the most important revolution in world history. It changes fundamentally how more people live their life than anything else we've talked about in this class up to this point. And that is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a revolution that changes the way that things are made. All throughout this class, up to this point at the start of period 3, who makes things? And the answer is craftsmen. Craftsmen make goods, and they make these goods either in their homes or in small shops. And most of these shops are located somewhere in Asia. Now, Asia is a big place. So what I really mean is in either East Asia, South Asia, or in the Middle East. This is the part of the world where the most things have been made for the longest period of time. This is why the trade routes go through these areas. And this is why things have always been made there the most. Instead, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, for the first time, goods will start to be made aided by machines. We're going to start to use machines to help mankind make things in large centers of concentrated labor that we're going to call factories. It's not going to be one person in their backyard making something. Now it's going to be lots of people using machines all under one roof. And what's the first region to industrialize? The maritime empires that were around in period 2, and some new Western empires that will be created in period 3. What does the Industrial Revolution do most importantly? It furthers the gap between wealthy maritime empires and the rest of the world, because once you start to use machines to make resources, you have more resources. And what does more resources equal? We've talked about this all throughout the entirety of this class. More resources equals more power. Now, yes, the Industrial Revolution changes how things are made, but it's also going to have profound social and political influences as well. It's going to change so much in a relatively short period of time. So, first question is, why does the Industrial Revolution start in this time period in Western Europe? Specifically, the Industrial Revolution is going to start in Britain. So the question is, why Britain? Why now? And the answer to this question is, you have to have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things to industrialize. And no country really ever had access to all the things that they're going to need to start to have machine-aided industrialization until Britain around 1800. So what do you need? Number one, you need abundant rivers and canals. Factories are going to be built on rivers because you need water sources. You need water for 2 reasons. You want to be on a river or a canal so that when you make something in your factory, you can immediately ship it. It helps for the transportation of those goods. That makes sense. However, the other big key ingredient to this is, during this time period, the key machine that's going to be used is steam engines. Engines are going to be created that can power huge machines in factories. They're going to be making things like woolen textiles. You can't have that. You can't have steam without access to water. So factories are going to be built on rivers and canals for those two reasons. The other thing you need is the holy trinity of industrialization. You have to have these three things in great number: coal, iron, and timber. That's the holy trinity. Britain has abundant coal. Britain has abundant iron. What they did not have was access to lumber until the end of period 2, when they had colonized Canada. And with the colonization of Canada, they're going to import large amounts of wood. So no one country had access to all three of the things you needed in the numbers that you needed until Britain in the start of this period. And this is one of the big reasons why it's going to start there. Increased urbanization. What do you need to industrialize? Lots and lots and lots of labor. That is cheap. Where do you get labor from? Cities. Cities are growing for a variety of reasons in Britain, and we're going to talk about that all throughout this unit. But rapidly growing cities are going to make labor cheap and available for factory owners. And this is going to become a big reason for why industrialization starts here. Another reason why you could not have had industrialization before this time period is you have to have large cities and large groups of people working in cities, working in factories in order to have industrialization. Well, that means the surrounding countryside has to be able to produce a lot of food. It wasn't until after the Columbian Food Exchange happened, and it wasn't until places like Britain and later on the United States and France and Germany and Russia had perfected the growing of these foods, that you could have a situation where the rural areas around cities could produce enough food to feed cities the size that you're going to see in the Industrial Revolution. So, better food, cheaper food. And here's the other thing. Yes, there's a holy trinity of resources you need: coal, iron, timber for industrialization. But there's lots of other things you need for industrialization. And those things are located all around the world. And unless you have access to global marketplaces and access to getting those things, you can't industrialize. Well, Britain was a maritime empire in period 2, and by the start of period 3, they had that global reach where the things they didn't have, they had access to go and get. And then finally, the accumulation of capital. Lots and lots of resources. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about what is capital and what is capitalism in this period. But capitalism is stuff that produces wealth. And you have to have access to a lot of capital to build a factory that's going to house 2,000 workers and the machines in there. You're going to have to collect and invest a lot of resources just to build one factory. And it wasn't until this time period that the institutions have been created that made the access to the large amounts of capital that people are going to need to start factories and build railroads and all the other stuff that's going to go with industrialization until this period. Now, the first thing is, how does the Industrial Revolution change how people work? We talked about this. For most of human history, people worked in their houses or in their own private little shops, and you worked either by yourself or maybe with a couple of other people making things. Now, and you were a skilled labor. You weren't just you didn't make a part of the shoe, you made the whole shoe. If you were a blacksmith, you didn't make a part of a sword, you made the whole sword. You were a highly skilled craftsman. That changes in this period. You're going to have large populations of unskilled laborers that will produce things like, for example, cotton textiles. Where have we always said cotton textiles were made before this period? In India, by hand, by skilled craftsmen who would make the entire part of the cloth. Now, that's going to be replaced by these giant behemoths factories that can produce so much cotton textile with hundreds and sometimes thousands of workers working in the same place under one roof using steam-powered machines to operate. That's how it changes. And it leads to an incredible amount of specialization of labor. Industrial workers in factories, they don't learn how to make a car. They learn how to put a tire on a car, and that's the only thing that they know how to do. Or they don't know how to make a cotton textile. They just know how to run one machine that makes a cotton textile. So what it does is it makes it really, really, really simple to train workers on how to build and make things, but it also makes them very, very, very easy to replace because it's not hard to learn how to do those jobs. That's going to keep labor very, very, very cheap. And like we said, that's going to be a fundamental change. So it's going to replace highly skilled workers who knew how to make the entirety of something with unskilled laborers in factories working with machines to create a finished product, like cotton textiles and other things we're going to talk all throughout this unit. By the end of this period, there are going to be 6 major industrial powers. That does not mean there's not more industrial powers on top of this. It just means these are going to be the big 6. You're going to need to know these 6. Britain, France, Germany, a new country that we're going to create in this period. And when I tell you the story of that in a few class periods, this story becomes very, very important to our narrative. Russia, who we have not talked about, Japan, and the United States of America. By the end of this period, the United States, which was a country that didn't even exist at the start of period 3, by the end of this period, the United States will be the dominant economic power in the world because we're a sleeping industrial giant that has everything we need to become an industrialized monster. And we will talk about the rise of the United States and its industrialization all throughout this period. But remember the big 6. What does industrialization do? It increases the manufacturing share of these states at the expense of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and East Asian states. What does that mean? It means in 1750, 80% of the world's cotton textiles were made in South Asia. In 1900, 80% of the world's cotton textiles were made in Britain and the United States. It's a shift in where things are made. And that shift's coming from these Asian regions we've talked about all throughout this class period. And it's going to these industrialized powers. And the world's never really changed since that. When you ask yourself who's making the most things and who are the most economically powerful, if I said, who are the most economically powerful countries on earth? The answer is the United States, Japan, and Germany. What about China? China's not one of the big 3. And we'll talk about all that in period 4. But the rise of this economic prominence and this position of global power is a relationship between how early did you industrialize and how powerful of a state you are even to this day. Why is Japan, an island we haven't even talked about hardly in this class, such a global power in the world today? Because something happens and they're going to industrialize quickly in this period, and it changes their entire course of their country for good and also for bad, because things like World War II are going to happen. But again, that's down the line. Technology of the industrial era, the most important piece of technology is the steam engine. The steam engine is invented by a Scottish inventor named James Watt, which means he's part of the British Empire. And here's the thing that engines do. I cannot impress upon you this one thing enough. This is so major. What is an engine? I like to think that an engine is not a tool. An engine is a key. All throughout human history, there is an enormous amount of potential kinetic energy in fossil fuels, coal, and oil. And mankind did not have the capability to unlock that potential. Engines, both the steam engine and then later on the gasoline combustible engine, like what we put in a car, unlocks the energy. Engines will greatly increase the amount of energy available to human beings for the production of goods. Now, obviously, this is going to have very, very, very mixed results. On the one hand, now I have 99-cent cheeseburgers from Burger King, which is awesome. And we're also destroying the ozone. So it's a mixed bag. All the wealth and riches and plenty that we get to partake in the world today is directly a result of the creation of engines that unlock the energy of fossil fuels. But so are all the negatives that are associated with it. It's a mixed bag. I'm not here to say industrialization is an awesome, awesome, happy thing. What I'm saying is it's an influential thing, and that's something we spend a lot of time talking about all throughout this year. With the creation of internal combustion engines and steam engines, it's going to revolutionize the way that transportation takes place in this unit, and it's also going to revolutionize communication. During this period, it's not a surprise, it's invented in Britain. You're going to see the first railroads and trains created. And trains are going to have the capability of moving an enormous amount of things long distances at an unprecedented speed. So much so that in this unit, what part of America is going to feed the city of New York? Kansas. How is food getting from Kansas to New York City? It's getting there by train. This couldn't ever happen in world history before this, and it's all a result of industrialization. You're going to see industrial states build railroads all over the place. This is a revolution in technology. Famously, one of the first trains went 25 miles an hour, and everyone's like, whoa, we can't do anything much faster than that or people will die. People had never traveled at that speed. By the end of this unit, trains that could go 60 or 70 miles an hour, that was nothing. Also, you're going to see eventually some people are going to take the same technology you could put on a train. They're going to put it on ships. You're going to see the first steamships created. And importantly, this is the first major invention in world history by an American, Robert Fulton. Robert Fulton creates the world's first steamships. What does that do? And what is so important about that? Now, for the first time, ships could go upriver. Rivers became two-way interstates. So a place like New Orleans at the base of the Mississippi River, they were used to receiving goods, but they could never send goods upriver. Now that changes. It's also going to change travel across oceans because now you weren't reliant upon wind and current patterns. Guess what you can do in the Indian Ocean now? You don't have to wait for the monsoon winds to change. You can just go to India whenever you want to with steam power because you're not at the mercy of the wind and the current pattern anymore because you're bringing your own power. And again, who has all this strength? Who has all this ability? It's the industrialized states. And just like there was a gap between Western Europeans and everyone else in period 2, the gap will grow and be accentuated between industrialized states and non-industrialized states. You're going to see a communication revolution. Another American in this time period is going to create a technology that's going to instantly connect major cities, and this is called the telegraph, invented by an American named Samuel Morse, aka Morse code. And with the telegraph, the technology is fairly similar to how a telephone wire works. But instead of sending sound across the wire, because this was a forerunner to the telephone, you sent a current, and trained operators on both sides of the wire could send the current in a signal, and you could understand it and read it and translate, and you could send messages at the speed of light. It's not long into the next period 4, where there's actually going to be a telegraph cable, a transatlantic telegraph cable laid at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean that connects New York City and London. What is happening in this period is at an unprecedented level. The world is shrinking. One of my favorite books is a book written this time period called Around the World in 80 Days. It's a very fun read, but basically the main idea of the book was it was possible by the end of period 3 to travel around the world in 80 days, which that just seemed crazy. But now in an era of steamships and trains, it becomes eminently possible. The other thing that both these technologies are going to make possible for the first time is large-scale voluntary migrations. You're going to see people moving at an unprecedented level in this unit, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that later on in this class. Now, oftentimes we like to say that there is a second phase to the Industrial Revolution. I didn't put it on this slide, but we can change that. We're going to say it starts in 1850, and we're going to say it continues to the present day. This is going to be centered in the new industrial powers, the United States and Germany. The early Industrial Revolution was focused on making cotton textiles and iron in places like Britain and France. I like to think of this quote-unquote second industrialization as a second phase, or an evolution of industrialism, centered in these newer states that had vast resources. In addition to doing the things that all industrial states did, making cotton textiles, using coal, iron, and lumber, it's also going to introduce new methods to produce steel, which is a quality of metal that we just had not had before, and chemicals. For example, there's a major American chemical company called DuPont that got its origins in period 3. Germany becomes a center of chemical production of lots of different things. Electricity is used for the first time. Another American makes a huge breakthrough in changing the world, and that's Thomas Edison, who invents the light bulb. They're going to use electricity both as a power source and a light source, which is, again, something that was never, ever, ever on the table before this, and using precision machinery to make parts for goods, like cars and motorcycles and trains, which are all the sorts of things you're going to see by the start of this next unit. Now, I'm going to close on this. Your fine people at the AP World History Institute want you to know an example of a specific railroad in the world. I figure I'll make your life easier. Teach you one that's super important that you might also use in APUSH. Transcontinental Railroad. Transcontinental Railroad was built in the 1860s, and it connects the western part of the United States to the east. You're like, no, it doesn't. It ends in Iowa. Yeah, well, then there's all sorts of railroad lines off of this that go everywhere. You could take something, put it on a train in San Francisco, and in 8 days later it could be in New York City. And that was absolutely crazy for the time. Nothing had been ever seen like this in world history. A railroad that went for 3,000 miles and connected two halves of a continent. And this won't even be the biggest railroad of this unit. Wait till I tell you about another one in a few days. Another thing they want you to know is about an artificially built canal that's going to make transportation easier in this unit. I like to think of it as a warp zone. In this time period, this is Britain, this is India. The British do business in India, and I'll tell you more of that story later on in this unit about ultimately what the British do to India. There's a reason people in India speak English. Well, I like to think of canals as warp zones. The British build a warp zone. They build a very famous canal right here called the Suez Canal in Egypt that reduces the journey they have to take to get to India by 2/3. Things, and again, both of these things go with this one main theme, which is we're making the world a smaller place, that we can now transport more goods so we can have more industrialization. And it's this huge growing bigger and bigger cycle that continues to happen all the way to the end of this period. And so much of what we have, how we live our lives, why we have such great abundance and wealth in the world today, comes from all of these elements of industrialization being introduced in the start of period 3. Let me tell you how important industrialization is going to be. We're going to talk about industrialization and all of its byproducts till the end of January. 2 months. That's how big and important this one theme is. When I tell you there's an argument that this is the greatest change in world history, even more than something like Columbus, that is not hyperbole. Make sure you get all this information, guys. Honestly, before the test, I'd come back and watch this video. This is one of the big videos of the year. You need this information. You guys all have a great day, and I will send you your information, your work in class.